brass handle of the boardroom door did not budge. Callum swiped his security card again, but the scanner flashed a cold, mocking red. Through the frosted glass, he could see Julian, the executive chairman, sitting in Callum's leather chair. Next to him stood Clara, Callum's ex-wife and co-founder, holding a pen. They were signing the documents to freeze his $10 billion green infrastructure fund. Hey friends, if you enjoy powerful revenge stories where the underdogs take back what's theirs, please subscribe to the channel. It only takes 1 second, but it deeply helps us grow and bring you more epic tales. Now, back to the story. Julian opened the door, a smug grin plastered across his face. He held a security box containing Callum's personal belongings. He tossed it onto the marble floor. The sound of plastic shattering echoed through the hallway. Clara did not even look up from her paperwork. She simply sipped her coffee, as if Callum were a ghost. Your services are no longer required. Callum, Julian whispered, his voice dripping with condescension. The board voted. You are too emotional for $10 billion. Run along before security escorts you out of your own building. Callum looked at the shattered box. He did not yell. He did not beg. He simply met Julian's eyes with a chilling, quiet focus. Callum felt the sting of betrayal wash away, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. He realized his years of loyalty meant absolutely nothing to these monsters. How far would Julian and Clara go to protect a luxury lifestyle built entirely on stolen foundations? Callum sat in his car, staring at his phone. The screen displayed a notification from his bank. His personal credit cards were declined. His access to the shared savings accounts had been blocked. Clara had filed a fraudulent court injunction, claiming Callum was mentally unstable and trying to liquidate their marital assets. They wanted to starve him out so he could not afford a lawyer to fight for his fund. He drove to his small cottage on the edge of London, the only property they had forgotten to lock him out of. He pulled a dusty black laptop from beneath the floorboards. It was a secure device connected to an old offshore investment network his father had set up years ago. As the screen glowed to life, Callum began tracking the money. He knew Julian lived in a £20 million mansion in Belgravia and drove a fleet of vintage sports cars. Clara had just purchased a penthouse in Chelsea. He wondered where two people on standard board salaries found the cash to live like royalty. The initial panic in Callum's chest hardened into a sharp, icy clarity. He was no longer a victim. He was an investigator. What hidden strings were keeping Julian and Clara's golden kingdom afloat? The laptop screen reflected in Callum's eyes as he spent the night digging through corporate filings. He bypassed the complex shell companies and went straight to the source. Every single luxury asset Julian and Clara owned was tied to a private Swiss establishment called Vanguard Trust. Vanguard Trust was a historic boutique bank. It specialized in offering massive, low-interest credit lines to wealthy executives, using their future stock options as collateral. Julian had borrowed £50 million against his shares in Callum's fund. Clara had done the same. They had not bought their luxury lives. They had rented them, using Callum's hard work as a guarantee. If the fund failed, or if the bank called in those loans, Julian and Clara would lose everything within 24 hours. Callum leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. He called Fiona, an old colleague who worked as a high-level financial auditor in Zurich. Fiona, Callum said quietly, tell me about Vanguard Trust. They are in trouble. Callum, Fiona warned. Their bad loans are piling up. They need a massive cash injection, or they will go under by the end of the month. Callum realized his enemies had built their entire lives on a mountain of high-risk debt, and the mountain was starting to crumble. Could a disgraced fund manager find enough leverage to buy a failing? Callum did not sleep. He spent the next day on secure calls with international investors who still trusted his name. He explained that while Julian had blocked his $10 billion fund, Callum still held the intellectual property rights to the green technology algorithms the fund relied on. He offered these investors a deal. If they backed him, they could acquire Vanguard Trust quietly. Together, they would create a new financial powerhouse. To secure the deal, Callum put up his grandfather's offshore timber estate as collateral. It was everything he had left. If this fails, Callum, you will be completely ruined, Fiona said over the secure line. You are risking your entire family inheritance on a bank that is practically drowning. Julian and Clara think they have won because they control my boardroom, Callum replied, his voice calm and steady. They don't realize I am about to own the ground they stand on. He sent the final wire transfer. The Swiss Regulatory Board approved the emergency acquisition of Vanguard Trust under a private holding company. Callum felt a rush of quiet power as he risked his last safety net for ultimate leverage. Would the acquisition clear before Julian and Clara discovered who was holding their debt? At the fund's headquarters, Julian poured champagne for Clara. They were celebrating their first official week without Callum. The media had praised them for securing the $10 billion fund. Calling Julian a visionary leader, Clara stood by the window, looking out over the London skyline, feeling completely untouchable. We should buy the building next door, Clara suggested, taking a sip. Callum always said it was too expensive. But we have the board's backing now. Callum was weak. Julian sneered. He spent too much time worrying about the environment and not enough about profit. We are going to leverage this fund to double our personal credit lines with Vanguard Trust tomorrow. Just then, Clara's phone buzzed. It was a notification from Vanguard Trust. Her monthly interest payment had been raised by 4% without warning. That's strange, Clara muttered, frowning at the screen. Vanguard never changes the rates without consulting us first. Just an administrative glitch, Julian dismissed, waving his. I'll call our account manager in the morning. We practically run that bank with the interest we pay. Clara felt a fleeting chill of unease, realizing her luxury lifestyle was entirely dependent on a bank she did not control. What happens when the bank you rely on suddenly starts changing the rules? In Zurich, Callum walked into the oak-paneled boardroom of Vanguard Trust. The board members looked tired, their faces lined with stress. They knew the bank had been hours away from bankruptcy. Before the private holding company stepped in, Callum sat at the head of the table. He laid out the new terms of operation. We are restructuring, Callum announced. Every high-risk personal loan is to be audited immediately, especially those belonging to British executives. The lead auditor gasped as he looked at the file Callum pushed forward. These loans to Julian and Clara, they are backed by shares in a fund that is currently undergoing a leadership transition. This is highly unstable collateral. Exactly, Callum said. They used my fund to buy their mansions. I want a full review of their assets. If they are even one day late on their payments, or if their collateral value drops. We call them loans. But Callum, Fiona whispered next to him, if we press them too hard now, they might find another lender to bail them out. Let them try, Callum smiled coldly. I bought the other two boutique banks in their circle yesterday. Callum savored the sensation of holding his enemy's entire financial survival in the palm of his hand. How long could Julian and Clara survive once their safety nets began to tear? Clara stood in the lobby of the five-star Savoy Hotel, laughing loudly with a group of investors. She had just signed a preliminary agreement to license Callum's older software to a rival firm. She felt like she had completely erased her ex-husband's legacy. She saw Callum walking through the lobby, wearing a simple wool coat. He looked tired, holding a paper cup of cheap coffee. Clara walked over to him, her heels clicking loudly on the marble, still hanging around the city.
Callum, she mocked.
I heard you had to move into your grandfather's old cottage.
How sad.
If you need a job, I suppose we could hire you as a consultant. For old time's sake. Callum looked at her, his expression unreadable. I am doing fine. Clara, I hope you are enjoying the penthouse. I am, she smiled viciously. And there is nothing you can do about it. We own the fund. We own the technology, and we own this city. Callum took a slow sip of his coffee and walked away without another word. Clara watched him go, feeling a deep sense of absolute victory. Clara's arrogance blinded her to the quiet confidence in Callum's eyes. Mistaking his silence for defeat, Why was Callum so calm when he had supposedly lost everything? Fiona called Callum later that evening. Her voice was tense. Callum, we just finished auditing Clara's personal accounts at Vanguard. You need to see this. It's not just about loans. Callum opened the encrypted file she sent. He stared at the transactions. Years before their divorce, Clara had been secretly transferring small percentages of Callum's personal royalty payments into an offshore account registered in Julian's name. It was a slow, systematic theft that had started while Callum was recovering from a major car accident. They had been planning this betrayal for over 5 years. It was never about a disagreement over the fund's direction. It was a coordinated heist to strip him of his wealth and his reputation. Callum felt a deep, burning anger. He had loved Clara, and he had trusted Julian as his best friend. They had watched him struggle to rebuild his health, while they quietly drained his accounts. Do you want me to leak this to the police? Fiona asked. No, Callum replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The police will take years. I want this settled by Friday. The pain of past betrayal transformed into a ruthless, burning desire for absolute financial destruction. What would happen when Julian and Clara realized their darkest secret was now owned by their victim? On Wednesday morning, Julian received a priority courier envelope at his office. He tore it open, expecting a standard quarterly update from Vanguard Trust. Inside was a single-page document printed on heavy cream paper. It was a formal demand for immediate repayment. Vanguard Trust was declaring his £50 million line of credit default imminent. The bank cited the recent instability of the fund's leadership as a material change in risk. Julian had exactly 48 hours to pay the entire balance, or the bank would seize his Belgravia mansion, his vintage cars, and his remaining shares in the fund. Julian ran to Clara's office, his face pale. Have you checked your mail? Vanguard is calling in my loans. All of them. Clara checked her laptop, her hands shaking. Mine too. They are demanding £30 million by Friday noon. This is impossible. We don't have that kind of liquid cash. Call the bank manager. Julian shouted. Tell him we will sue. We are their biggest clients. Julian's confidence shattered as he realized the safety net of his luxury life was dissolving in an instant. Who was the mysterious new owner of Vanguard Trust who had authorized such a brutal move? Clara spent the afternoon calling every financial institution in London, but the response was always the same. No one was willing to refinance their loans. The market had suddenly become icy toward them. It was as if an invisible wall had been built around their names. They are blacklisting us, Clara whispered, staring at her phone in horror. Every boutique bank we contact says they cannot help us due to internal compliance issues. Julian. What is happening? Julian paced his office, sweating through his expensive suit. It doesn't make sense. Vanguard was practically begging us for business last month. Now, they won't even let us speak to the managing director. They keep saying the decision came directly from the new parent company. Who bought them? Clara demanded. Find out who owns the parent company. Julian typed furiously on his keyboard, trying to trace the ownership of the Swiss holding company. The layers of shell corporations were incredibly complex, but they all pointed to a single entity registered in the Cayman Islands. The panic of being hunted by an unseen predator began to tear at Julian and Clara's partnership. Would they find the owner before the Friday deadline stripped them of everything? Callum stood in his cottage, looking at the rain beating against the window. He received a notification that Julian had requested an urgent meeting with the representative of the new parent company. They were offering to surrender a portion of the $10 billion fund's future profits in exchange for a loan extension. Callum smiled. They were offering to pay him with his own money. Schedule the meeting for Friday at 11 a.m., Callum told Fiona. Tell them the owner will meet them personally at the Vanguard Trust private offices in London. They are going to bring their lawyers. Callum, Fiona warned. They will try to find a legal loophole. Let them bring whoever they want, Callum said. The law is on our side. They sign the loan agreements. They use stolen assets as collateral. There is no loophole big enough to save them. He put on his suit, the same one he wore the day they threw him out of the boardroom. It was time to close the trap. Callum felt a sense of profound calm as the final pieces of his plan fell into place. How would Julian and Clara react when they walked into the room and saw who was sitting in the owner's chair? Julian and Clara walked into the private conference room at Vanguard Trust's London branch. They were accompanied by 3 high-priced attorneys. Julian adjusted his tie, trying to regain his usual air of superiority. "We will offer them 10% of the fund's management fees," Julian whispered to Clara. "That should satisfy any Swiss banker." The double doors opened. Callum walked in, followed by Fiona and a team of international lawyers. He did not look like a defeated man. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and his posture was commanding. He sat down at the head of the conference table, right across from his former partners. Clara gasped. Julian's jaw dropped. "What are you doing here?" "Callum," Julian hissed. "This is a private meeting with the owners of the bank. Security. Get this man out of here." The Vanguard managing director stood up. "Mr. Julian, please be quiet. You are speaking to Callum, the sole owner of Vanguard Trust." The illusion of Julian's power vanished, replaced by a cold, paralyzing realization of his complete vulnerability. Could Julian and Clara find any way to bargain with the man they had ruined and mocked? "This is a joke," Clara stammered, her voice high and panicked. "Callum, you can't buy a bank. You were broke. We froze your accounts." "You froze my personal retail accounts," Callum said, his voice quiet and steady. "But you forgot about my family's trust. I liquidated my grandfather's estate to buy Vanguard. And now, I own your debt." He pushed a thick stack of documents across the table. "These are the foreclosure notices for your Chelsea penthouse, Julian's Belgravia estate, and your private yachts," Callum continued. "Additionally, we have uncovered the systematic theft Clara committed over 5 years ago, funneling my royalty payments into Julian's accounts. That is bank fraud." Julian's lead attorney looked at the documents, his face turning pale. He leaned over to Julian and whispered, "We cannot fight this. They have clear evidence of fraud, and the loan terms are ironclad. You need to settle immediately." "There is no settlement," Callum said coldly. "The deadline is 12 p.m. It is currently 11:40. Callum felt a deep, satisfying sense of justice as he watched his tormentors realize they had no escape. What would Julian and Clara do when they realized they had exactly 20 minutes left before total ruin? Clara fell back into her chair, her face devoid of color. She looked at Callum, her eyes filling with tears. "Callum, please. We built that fund together. You loved me once. You can't do this to us. You chose to destroy me." "Clara," Callum replied, his face a mask of stone. "You watched me suffer and laughed while you spent my money. You wanted me to beg. I will not beg. And I will not show mercy." At exactly noon, the managing director clicked his laptop screen. "The deadline has passed. The foreclosure process has begun. The assets are now frozen." Julian stood up, his body trembling with rage. "You think you've won? We still control the $10 billion fund. The board will never let you back in." Just then, the boardroom door opened again. 2 officers from the City of London police walked in, holding arrest warrants for financial fraud and money laundering. They walked straight to Julian and Clara, placing them in handcuffs. Callum watched his enemies being led away in shame, their luxury empire collapsing into dust. How does it feel to lose everything you stole in the span of a single hour?